Trial balance. Let's first understand the concept behind the trial balance before illustrating its importance and why it is prepared. Do you recall the accounting equation? It is assets equal to liabilities plus shareholders' equity. This equation must always be balanced. So if we add on one side, we have to add an equivalent amount on the other side. And if we deduct from one side, we should deduct the same amount from the other side. Or we could add and deduct on one side of the equation. The important thing is that what we change on one side must have an equal change on the other side. Remember the balance. If you add weight on one side, you have to add an equivalent weight on the other side. Now let's look at the extended accounting equation. Also, let's include some accounts in each category for illustration. We will assume that a company has the following accounts. Now let's assume the following transaction took place. On January 1st, the company issued common shares for $100,000. Cash is debited by $100,000 and common shares is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. On January 5th, the company bought supplies on account for $2,000. Supplies is debited by $2,000 and accounts payable is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted to the ledger accounts as follows. On January 10th, the company rendered services on account for $5,000. Accounts receivable is debited by $5,000 and service revenue is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. On January 13th, the company rendered service for $10,000 in cash. Cash is debited by $10,000 and service revenue is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. On January 29th, the company paid the monthly salaries of $4,000. Salaries expense is debited by $4,000 and cash is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. On January 31st, based on a physical count, the company found that supplies used is $1,200. Supplies expense is debited by $1,200 and supplies is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. On January 31st, the company received the rent bill for $3,000. Rent expense is debited and rent payable is credited by the same amount, and the transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. On January 31st, the company distributed dividends of $1,500. Dividends is debited by $1,500 and cash is credited by the same amount. Then this transaction is posted in the ledger accounts as follows. Remember that in each transaction the debit side is equal to the credit side, so each transaction is balanced. When we post the transaction from the journal to the ledger, there is a risk that we might make an error by posting a different figure, misplacing it, or using a different account. To confirm that the amounts that we posted in the debit side are equivalent to those posted in the credit side, we can add all the debits and all the credits in each account. If they balanced, then this confirms that the accounting equation is balanced, and that is what we call a trial balance. Let's do that. Remember that we are dealing with account balances. Account balances change each minute, if not each second. It is extremely important to put the specific date in which the trial balance is prepared. Now we are going to list all of the accounts which the company has. However, it is better to put them in a certain order so that it is easier to find out any account. This order is usually as follows: assets, followed by liabilities, followed by shareholders' equity, followed by revenues, and then expenses. We will list the accounts according to this sequence, and we will arrange the accounts within each category in order of their liquidity as follows. In assets, we will include cash, then accounts receivable, then supplies. In liabilities, we will include accounts payable and then rent payable. In shareholders' equity, we will enter common shares followed by dividends. In revenues, we have only one account, which is service revenue. In expenses, we will write supplies expense followed by salaries expense and rent expense. We now need to add the debit and credit balances of each account and write them in the equivalent debit and credit columns beside each account in the trial balance. By adding the debit and credit sides for each account, we get the following. Cash is $110,000 in debit, $5,500 in credit. Accounts receivable is $5,000 in debit and 0 credit. Supplies $2,000 in debit and $1,200 in credit. Accounts payable is 0 in debit and $2,000 in credit. Rent payable is 0 debit and $3,000 credit. Common shares is 0 debit and $100,000 credit. Dividends is $1,500 debit and 0 credit. Revenues is 0 debit and $15,000 credit. Supplies expense is $1,200 debit and 0 credit. Salaries expense is $4,000 debit and 0 credit. Rent expense is $3,000 debit and 0 credit. Now we will copy those balances and put them into the trial balance as follows. Cash $110,000 and $5,500. Account receivable $5,000 and 0. Supplies $2,000 and $1,200. Accounts payable 0 and 2,000. Rent payable 0 and 3,000. Common shares 0 and $100,000. Dividends $1,500 and 0. Service revenue 0 and 15,000. Supplies expense $1,200 and 0. Salaries expense $4,000 and 0. Rent expense $3,000 and 0. Now we will add both debits and credits to make sure that they balance. The total debits is $126,700 and the total credits is also $126,700. This confirms that the amounts in the debits are equal to the amounts in the credit. This is what we call trial balance by summations. However, this does not confirm that we use the correct account. So, for example, if $1,200 is posted by mistake to the dividends account, it will still balance. So the trial balance will not confirm this. Usually the business is more interested in the balances of each account, not the total debits and credits of each account. So we need to calculate the balances, and this will raise the question if we had made any mistake in calculating the balances. By taking the balance of cash, it is $104,500 in debit, and the supplies account is $800 in debit. The remaining balances are already calculated before. So after calculating the balances, we need to prepare a trial balance to confirm that all of the debits are equal to all the credits. So by taking only the balances of each account, we could get a trial balance as follows. You will notice that only the debit and credit balances of each account appear. The total of the debit and credit sides on the trial balance are different from the trial balance by summation, since only the balance of each account is taken. As both sides are equal, this confirms that all the debits are equal to all the credits, and also that we have correctly calculated the balances of each account. This trial balance is called the trial balance with balances. As stated earlier, the trial balance should always balance. In other words, the debit total should always equal to the credit total.